The room had gone completely quiet, not the polite, professional quiet of a recording session winding down for the night. This was something else entirely. The kind of silence that falls when a decision is about to be made, that everyone in the room can feel but nobody wants to say out loud. It was 1991. The Bodyguard was still a film that existed only on paper and in the minds of the people sitting in that Los Angeles studio. And Kevin Costner, equal parts director, producer, and true believer in this project, was staring at a legal pad filled with notes, tapping his pen against the edge of the mixing board, working up the courage to say what he'd already decided. Whitney Houston was not yet in the building. That was important, because the conversation Kevin Costner was about to have with his production team was the kind of conversation that needed to happen before she walked through the door. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now. We tell these stories every single week. The song was Dolly Parton's "I Will Always Love You." It had been chosen for the film's climactic moment, the emotional peak of a love story that was already generating enormous Hollywood buzz. Whitney's voice was going to carry that scene. Everyone agreed on that. What they did not agree on, what had quietly become the single most contested creative decision of the entire production, was how that song was going to begin. The original Dolly Parton version started with gentle guitar, easing you in before the voice arrived. The arrangement drafted for Whitney followed the same logic. Let the orchestration set the stage first. It was the safe choice, the professional choice, and, if anyone in that room was being honest, already the wrong one. But nobody wanted to be the first to say that out loud. Nobody except Kevin Costner. "Cut the intro," he said, setting the legal pad down. "Go straight to her voice. No instruments, no orchestration, just Whitney alone, before anything else starts." The room went quiet again. What Kevin was proposing was, from a commercial radio standpoint, borderline insane. Radio programmers in 1991 did not love silence. They did not love a cappella openings that asked a listener to sit with an unaccompanied human voice before the first chord struck. The format had rules, and those rules had been explained to Costner by people who had been in this industry far longer than he had been making films. But Costner had a stubbornness his collaborators had learned to recognize. It wasn't arrogance, it was conviction. A deep, almost irrational confidence in his instincts about story, about emotion, about the precise moment when an audience stops watching a film and starts living inside it. And his instinct was screaming that the a cappella opening was not a risk. It was the entire point. "She walks out alone," he said, "and before anything else happens, before the orchestra, before the lights, before any of it, you hear her voice. Just her. And the audience understands everything about this character in those first few seconds. That's the scene. That's the whole movie right there." His production team exchanged the kind of looks that people exchange when they've already decided they're going to lose an argument, but haven't quite accepted it yet. Nobody was convinced, but nobody stopped him either. What none of them knew, what Kevin Costner himself may not have fully understood in that moment, was that he was about to walk into a conversation with a woman who had spent her entire life navigating exactly this kind of creative tension. The tension between what the industry wanted from her and what she knew, in the deepest part of herself, she was actually capable of giving. Whitney Elizabeth Houston had grown up singing in the New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, standing beside her mother, Cissy Houston, one of the most respected gospel voices in the country. She had learned music not as a commercial product, but as a form of prayer, as something you offered up completely, without calculation, without safety nets, without the protective layer of orchestration between your soul and the people listening. Gospel didn't give you walls to hide behind. It demanded that you show up entirely as yourself and trust that what you had was enough. That was the foundation. But by 1991, it had been covered over by years of industry pressure and the relentless expectation that she would be, above all else, presentable. Arista Records had taken the raw, incandescent thing she was and polished it into something that could be sold to the widest possible audience. It had worked spectacularly, but the cost had been a growing distance between the voice the industry showcased and the voice that lived inside her, the one that didn't know anything about radio formats or the commercial wisdom of easing your audience in gently. She walked into the studio that afternoon and could feel it immediately. The specific atmospheric pressure of a room where a decision has already been made and everyone is waiting to see how the talent will respond. She had walked into that pressure before. She knew exactly what it felt like. Kevin Costner was waiting. He laid out his vision, plain and direct, the way he always did. No orchestra at the start, no instrumental introduction, just her voice, alone, unaccompanied, carrying the full weight of the opening for several seconds before anything else came in. Whitney listened. She didn't respond immediately. She looked at the microphone stand in the center of the recording booth and was quiet for a moment that stretched just long enough to make everyone in the room acutely aware of how long moments can feel when something important is being decided. "Let me just try something," she said. She walked into the recording booth. The engineer looked at Costner. Costner looked at the engineer. Nobody said anything. The red light came on. What happened in the next several seconds has been described by the people who were in that room in almost identical terms, regardless of how many years have passed or how many times they've been asked to recall it. They describe a quality of attention that came over the room. A sudden, involuntary stillness, like the moment just before a thunderstorm when the air pressure changes and every living creature goes quiet. Whitney closed her eyes. The first note came out of silence so complete that several people in the control room later said they couldn't remember breathing. It wasn't a note that announced itself. It didn't arrive with the kind of vocal display that signals to an audience that something impressive is about to happen. It arrived the way truth arrives, quietly without warning, and with a weight that you feel before you understand it. She was not singing to demonstrate her range or win an argument. She was singing the way she had learned to sing in Newark, with nothing between her voice and the people listening, no safety net, no orchestration to catch her if she fell. Just the voice, and the silence around it that made the voice the only thing in the world. Kevin Costner's legal pad slid off the edge of the mixing board. He didn't notice. His eyes were on the glass partition separating him from Whitney, and his face had taken on the expression of a man who has just been shown something he wasn't entirely prepared for. The engineer's hand, which had been resting near the fader, went completely still. Someone in the back of the room, one of the assistant producers, a practical, unsentimental woman who had been in the music business for over a decade, put her hand over her mouth. Whitney held the last note of the a cappella passage, let it expand in the room until it filled every corner of it, and then, without opening her eyes, held it just a moment longer than anyone expected. When she finally released it, the silence that followed was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of impact. The kind of quiet that comes after something strikes you, and you need a second to understand what just hit you. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Kevin Costner finally exhaled. He leaned toward the intercom button, pressed it, and said the only thing there was to say. "That's it. That's the one. That's exactly it." Whitney opened her eyes. The a cappella introduction to "I Will Always Love You" runs approximately 18 seconds. In the 30 years since The Bodyguard was released, those 18 seconds have been analyzed by musicologists, studied by vocal coaches, and described in interviews by an extraordinary number of people who have tried to articulate what makes them so powerful, and why they land the same way every single time, regardless of how many times you've heard them. The consensus explanation is that they work because of what they ask the listener to do. An orchestral introduction creates an emotional context for a voice before the voice arrives. The instruments tell you how to feel. The voice then confirms it. It is a comfortable, well-established structure, but it keeps a slight distance between the artist and the audience. There is always, however briefly, a layer of mediation. Whitney's 18 seconds remove that layer entirely. There is no preparation, no context setting, no moment of adjustment. There is only a human voice emerging from silence, asking you to be present with it right now, without defenses. It is an act of extraordinary exposure. And what makes it work is not just that the voice is technically remarkable, though it is, but that you can hear the complete absence of self-protection. You can hear in those 18 seconds every year of Newark and every Sunday in the New Hope Baptist Church, and every moment when Whitney was not the polished commercial product that Arista Records needed her to be, but simply a woman with a voice she had learned to trust completely. The Bodyguard opened in November of 1992. The soundtrack album became one of the best-selling albums in history. I Will Always Love You spent 14 weeks at the top of the Billboard Hot 100. The a cappella opening became, in the cultural conversation around the song, inseparable from what made it what it was. Radio programmers who had been concerned about the unconventional structure discovered that listeners were not confused or alienated by the unaccompanied opening. They were arrested by it. They stopped what they were doing. They listened. Kevin Costner, asked about that recording session in various interviews over the years, has never claimed credit for the a cappella choice the way a producer who had won an argument might. What he has said amounts to the same thing in each telling. He had an instinct. Whitney Houston had a voice that made the instinct right. He pushed for silence at the beginning because he believed it would make what followed land harder. What he could not have anticipated was that Whitney wasn't just filling the silence. She was transforming it, turning the absence of everything else into a frame, a way of telling the audience that what they were about to hear deserved their complete, unguarded attention. The engineer who was in the room that day described it plainly. She walked in and you knew she'd made a decision. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't performing being confident. She was settled, like she'd already gone somewhere inside herself and figured out what she needed to do. Those 18 seconds still stop rooms. They stop rooms in restaurants and in cars and in the living rooms of people who have heard the song hundreds of times and think they know exactly what's coming. There is something in that opening that defeats familiarity, that insists on being heard freshly, that refuses to become background. Whitney Houston was many things across her career: a commercial force, a cultural phenomenon, a Grammy-decorated superstar who sold records at a scale very few artists in history have matched. But what she was, before any of that, was a girl who learned to sing in a church in Newark, who learned that the most powerful thing a voice can do is show up completely alone and trust that what it has is enough. She knew something that day in that Los Angeles studio that Kevin Costner had the wisdom to sense, but the production team was too worried about radio formats to consider. She knew that silence isn't a risk. Silence is an invitation. And when you accept that invitation with everything you have, when you walk into the quiet with no safety net and nothing between what you feel and the people listening, you don't lose the audience. You give them something they didn't know they needed. Those 18 seconds are the proof. They have always been the proof.